This conference will now be recorded.
Okay, then I will go ahead and get started. Thanks everyone for joining us this morning or afternoon for the Metropolitan Water District Representative Caucus and the special meeting of the Board of Directors West Basin. October 6th, it is now 12:30. So with that, first of all, we will have the roll call.
Yes, President Williams, I'll begin roll call now. Director Alvarez. Director Deere.
Here.
Director Gray. Director Houston.
Here.
President Williams.
Here.
And President Williams, if you don't mind, I think staff, is Director Gray on the line? I apologize, President Williams. It sounds like Director Gray will be joining us momentarily if she's not already on the line.
Okay.
She'll be joining us momentarily, President Williams.
Can we go ahead and continue with the meeting? Start of the meeting?
Correct.
So we have a quorum.
We do have a quorum.
Okay. And that moves us to public comment. Is there any public comment?
President Williams, we have not received any public comment, although we do have several people here, including some members of the public. So if anybody would like to make public comment, please let us know. Seeing and hearing none.
Okay, then we'll go on to, with our agenda to item number 4, discussion items. Mr. E.J. Caldwell.
Yes, President Williams, we are lucky enough to have Devin Opadier join us from Metropolitan Water District. He serves as the Chief Operating Officer and Assistant General Manager of the Metropolitan Water District. And I know that he is listed as the presenter for today. He is joining us, but he did let me know that he will be having several staff members join and chiming in on a couple of very key issues, including I know I saw Bill Hazenkamp join us. So Devin, on the line. I don't know if I see you yet.
Good morning, EJ. Are you able to see me?
I see you.
Yes.
Morning, President Williams.
Hi, Devin.
It's nice to see you. Thank you for the introduction, EJ. And yeah, I was hoping to give a few updates on some things that are coming up on our agenda and also items that are kind of developing that I thought you all would be interested in. Very quickly, the basic issues are some of the water conditions and operational things that we're seeing develop here at the end of 2021 going into 2022. Wanted to talk a little bit about a very successful board retreat that we had just last week here at Metropolitan, and also share with you some things that are developing in our local resources program. We have an action item that will be coming to our board next week related to the local resource program. You all are big participants in that program, and you might find some interest in what that action item looks like. And then the last topic was really to let you know that there are some developing conditions on the Colorado River, and I wanted to have Bill Hazenkamp, I believe he's present here, be able to talk a little bit as our manager of Colorado River Resources to share with you some of what's going on there. So those were the topics I was hoping to cover. There anything EJ or President Williams that I have not listed that you might want to hear about? If not, I can get into it.
Go ahead, please.
Thank you. So the first thing is just you probably heard that last week on Wednesday and Thursday, our chair, Gloria Gray, conducted the first board retreat that we've had since 2019. And not only was it the first board retreat since that time frame, it was also the first time that our board, for the most part, was able to get together in person for about a year and a half. We had about 26 of our board members or so in person at the retreat, and then we had a number of directors that were able to participate online. And it was a pretty remarkable event. The first day really focused a lot on communication and really re-engaging the directors in communications with each other in a less formal environment than our typical day-to-day board meetings that seem to be so action-oriented. So it was very productive. Some great discussions around how to advance DE&I issues at Metropolitan. And on the second day, we ended up having a pretty robust dialogue around the board's interest in key policy issues that need to be considered over the next 3 to 5 years. And that lasted for a few hours. If you were watching that retreat, it would have been hard to see, but those concepts that directors were throwing out were being captured on white paper that ended up being put up on the wall along the side of the room. And we ended up capturing all of these concepts and quickly trying to document them as the basis for what we will be preparing as a strategic plan to reflect the board's input. And Adele intends to bring that strategic plan over the course of the next few months back for discussion. But it was a great opportunity for input from the board. And as I had mentioned, in a way that was much less formal than our typical board meetings. I wasn't sure if Director Williams or Chair Gloria Gray are online, if either of you had additional thoughts or input that you might want to add as participants in that retreat, and Chair Gray as the convener of the retreat.
Okay,
Devin,
Director Gray?
yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Devin, before you go any further, would you please, for the benefit of our audience, what is a DE&I?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion. I'm sorry for the use of the acronym like that. And yeah, it was really a discussion that raised awareness of some of these issues, and in some way, actually, it was a bit of a training of sorts, but it was a wonderful background piece that the board and the staff that were present were able to go through. It was on the morning of the second day of the retreat.
Very good. Okay, Director Gray?
Thank you, President Williams. Thank you, Devin, for mentioning the retreat and reporting on it. The only thing I'd like to add is that first of all, Devin mentioned the discussion the second day with the board and the general manager engaged in really talking about concepts that will lead into priorities for the board, and that would be the strategic plan that Devin is talking about. But that was the whole idea, is really for the board to give input to the general manager what they saw as priorities that they wanted to address in the coming year. And so there was a lot of information, a lot of ideas, a lot of concept which was captured on paper and will be brought to the board for a more kind of focused discussion. But it was also important to give direction to the staff through the general manager in terms of what were the ideas and how they hope to accomplish it. So the conversation will continue with that discussion as to, focus on priorities for the board and the general manager. And so the other piece that was really important is the diversity, equity, and inclusion. that was discussed, and there was a presentation that was presented by a facilitator, and he led us through some exercises, but also there was a draft DE&I statement that was presented to the board, and that will be, the board will consider that for approval by the board as a statement on D&I. I think we will probably have it on the agenda this coming October this month, if not for sure in November. But the intent is for the board to adopt a DE&I statement representing their perspective on diversity, equity, and inclusion. The first day I thought was very productive. I've heard only positive comments from board members regarding communicating with each other, how to be a better communicator. Rhonda Hillier was the facilitator for that, so she led us through a number of exercises that I think will be helpful in terms of a productive debate discussion as we engage in the many issues for the board. Paul Brown was the facilitator for the discussion with the board on priorities. So it was a very productive 2 days, and I was very pleased with it. And I've heard only positive comments from board members and staff. So thank you, Director, President Williams.
Okay, thank you. Is that it? Anyone else? Okay, back to you, Devin.
Thank you, President Williams. So the next topic I wanted to touch on is really what we're seeing in terms of water supply conditions this year, and it also relates to the development of 2022 and the hydrology that we're seeing. So obviously everybody on this call knows that we're in the second year of a drought sequence, and last year on the State Water Project, we saw a 20% State Water Project allocation. And, you know, initially people might think of that and it's not a big deal. But I want to take us all back to where we were 25 years ago and the planning process that we undertook at Metropolitan with all of your agencies then. It was the first integrated resources plan. And at that time, a 20% State Water Project allocation was viewed as very severe. In fact, DWR in the mid-90s said that a 20% state allocation was the worst state allocation that contractors would ever see. Things have changed, and over the years we have seen the impact of climate change, of change from a regulatory perspective, and frankly changes to the system itself that are leading to dramatic swings in the supply available on the State Water Project. In 2017 and 2019, we had huge allocations that allowed us to store significant amounts of water. But last year, we had a 20% allocation, which matched what used to be considered the worst projected allocation you'd get. To give you a sense, a 20% allocation gives Metropolitan roughly 400,000 acre-feet of supply on the State Water Project. Then we have to augment that with transfers or other stored water that we have on the project to try to meet our needs. That was followed up in 2021 with a 5% allocation, which ties the record for the lowest ever. And oddly, DWR's projections don't show a scenario where a 5% could happen. When they share their reliability reports with all the contractors so that contractors can plan on what they might receive under different conditions, that reliability report doesn't show anything as low as a 5% allocation. We've been able to manage through this second year of drought in the most of extreme of circumstances through a series of actions that have produced additional water in this dry year to meet our needs. The biggest piece of that has been draws on storage that we had pre-delivered on the State Water Project system, and we're utilizing that storage to get through 2021. But other significant actions that the Metropolitan Board approved in the beginning of this year allowed us to do deals to shift where our member agencies are pulling water off of our system in a way such that if those agencies incurred costs to do that, that we could compensate them, because we're asking them to shift onto Colorado supplies or other stored supplies. Recently, in fact, just yesterday, there was a pretty significant press event that recognized one of those arrangements that is with Metropolitan and the city of Los Angeles, whereby the city of LA is shifting to taking water on Colorado River connections that can deliver Colorado to the city and some stored water, instead of pulling as much water from the State Water Project. And our chair, Gloria Gray, was there and spoke to that, along with our general manager and representatives from some of the other agencies on the west side of the system. So actions like this are being taken, and they're unprecedented. These are things that we're doing to try to manage with a pretty severe situation. Now, earlier this year, and when I say earlier, this is kind of in the July, August timeframe, the Department of Water Resources sent a signal to all of the state water contractors. They said it's possible that the initial allocation for 2022 could be zero. And they weren't trying to be alarmist. They were recognizing that the levels of storage in the State Water Project reservoirs were declining. And since that announcement from DWR, we've now seen Lake Oroville hit historic lows, and San Luis Reservoir is in a similar situation. So what has happened now is the Department of Water Resources has sent a much stronger signal. Instead of saying that it might be a zero allocation, they are essentially saying that when they declare that first allocation that will happen contractually, they have to do it by December 1st. We're hearing it'll probably be in late November, that it will be zero. What that means is that all state water contractors on that state water project system can only receive stored water that they might have, or if they have access to any exchanges that are available, they're not going to have any access to allocated water supplies. And furthermore, what DWR is saying is that it could be in place at a zero allocation, not just at the very beginning of the year, but it's possible that it could be in place that way for a couple months. They're not saying that the final allocation for 2022 is going to be zero. In fact, their analysis is showing that there's a coin flip chance that it would be 20% or higher, 50% of the time, or half the time, a 20% allocation or higher, and then half the time less than 20%. So we're going to get something, but I think the key is that what they're signaling is that at the very beginning of the year and for the first few months, it could be zero. So that is resulting in a lot of concern among many of the state water contractors, ourselves included. DWR has even gone to the extreme of asking state water contractors to submit their schedules of delivery if we needed health and safety supplies. And so we've been in conversations with our member agencies that are dependent on state water project supplies to ask if there was a zero state water project allocation and you aren't able to shift to connections where we can provide you Colorado water or other stored water, what would the health and safety needs look like? And we're working with DWR to coordinate around that. This is really a just in case kind of discussion, but we need to be prepared. And so those discussions also include things like, at what point do we talk about mandatory restrictions? At what point do we need to be calling for mandatory outdoor water use limitations, because you want to preserve supply for businesses and for indoor use within these areas? So this is really ratcheting up the discussion, and it's not a certainty, but it's rather in order to be prepared if that zero allocation were to extend long into 2022. So pretty significant dialogue going on right now with the state and with our member agencies. We had a robust discussion with our member agency managers about this on Friday, and we also let them know that we would be bringing this discussion to our board in our water planning meeting committee next week. So a lot more to come on that, and we'll see how things develop in the fall, but I think that that's an important item for you all to be aware of. The second item that I wanted to touch on in addition to that was our local resources program.
Just a minute, Devin.
Sure.
Please define water supply as it relates to health and safety, because it seems to me that all water supply deals with health and safety. So what is your definition here? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for raising that question. So when the State Water Project delivers water or makes water available to the contractors, of which we are the largest contractor, they do it under contract provisions that we all have, where we've signed this contract with the state. And the basic provision is that the state will look at the supply available through pumping from the Bay Delta that may be runoff that's happening at a given time, month to month. They will also look at stored water that is available in San Luis Reservoir in Oroville. And when they look at those two sources, they will declare an allocation. That allocation is a percent of each State Water Project contractor's rights. So an example is this year they declared 5% of the contract rights for all the contractors to be available to them. And that is the same percentage for every contractor. When they face a situation where it's zero, they're basically saying, we're not going to declare that percentage available. There is a provision in the contract where they can say, that doesn't mean we're not going to deliver any water to you. Under this alternative provision, they can allow for some deliveries to contractors that make a claim that it's necessary in order to provide for basic health and safety needs, which would generally be indoor use, some allowance for fire flows, some allowance for commercial and critical business activities. And it's a way for them to limit the water that is being delivered outside of that allocation approach to only really the critical needs that contractors define. Okay. So what they've given us as guidance is, this is DWR, that you start with 55 gallons per capita per day, and then you add to that the claims you might have for the water that's needed for critical business needs to be able to continue to maintain industrial commercial activity. It's not on an agency by agency basis. Instead, it would then allow DWR to say to the state board, we need to continue to operate our pumps to provide for these basic needs for our contractors. And that's what it would lead to, President Williams, is it gives DWR the ability to make that argument that we can't limit our pumping to zero. We need to pump for a certain amount to provide for these basic needs for the contractors.
Thank you very much. Any follow-up questions on that?
Yeah, this is Russ LeFave. Devin, so if we have a zero allocation, what do we do about Los Virgenes and Caucus, and I guess some parts of Los Angeles?
And thank you for that. We would also include some of the other member agencies that we have that are on the east side of the system that are also dependent on the State Water Project supplies. That includes folks like the Inland Empire Utilities Agency, Three Valleys Municipal Water District, Upper San Gabriel Valley Municipal Water District are all agencies that are part of this group. So that is where the additional supply I had just mentioned, which is kind of basic supplies the State Water Project could provide under this extreme scenario of health and safety needs. So there'd be water available there. We also have stored supplies that we're able to access, although they're much more limited now because we've used a fair amount of those stored supplies over the last 2 years. We are also looking at the southern reservoirs that we have access to, namely Castaic, Silverwood, and Pyramid, where those reservoirs hold water we consider to be for emergency purposes. And the discussion with DWR is at what point would we be able to tap into some of those reservoirs for the first few months of the year. If DWR is saying it's not going to be zero for the full year, but it might be zero for the first few months, maybe you can tap into those supplies and then replenish those supplies later in the year when you have access to additional water. So those are some of the considerations that are on the table, Director Lefebvre.
So, Devin, I didn't get a chance to say this, but when you were talking about the retreat, something I thought was particularly useful, very, very good, was that some of the exercises caused the directors to form teams, and the way that those teams worked, there was an awful lot of just personal interaction that I think is really going to be useful in the future. I really was I was very impressed by the way that that part of the retreat was put together.
Okay, Devin.
Thank you, President Williams. So the last piece that I wanted to touch on before we touch base with Bill Hazenkamp, and you all are familiar that we run this local resources program that provides incentives largely right now for recycled water production and for groundwater cleanup and recovery. And in June, the Metropolitan Board approved an adjustment to that LRP program. Under this program, we can execute contracts that can extend up to 25 years, whereby an agency that develops a project that, for example, produces recycled water, that agency can receive incentives from Metropolitan for each acre foot that is produced from that project to help offset the cost of the project. These are kind of the general terms. There are provisions that are performance oriented in these contracts. And one of those provisions is that once we sign the contract, the project has to be online and producing within a certain amount of time. And what the board did was in June, the board acknowledged that there are circumstances that can arise where it's difficult for an agency to bring the project online on the exact time frame that is agreed to in these agreements. So it allowed for an extension to be granted. And what the framework the board adopted was an extension could be granted up to 3 years. There would need to be a discussion about why it's needed, what led to these circumstances, but that framework was approved by the board. What we are now hearing from folks, and we're bringing an item to the board next week, is to take the same kind of framework, but allow it to apply for a project that has already started operation. And the situation that we're addressing here is recognizing that you may have a project that's operating, and it may have been 10 years into that 25-year contract, just as an example. And something happens where the project could face an act of God, it could face a change in water quality, it could face an operational constraint that causes the project to go down and it's no longer able to produce. Metropolitan's interest is in that project being online and producing water because it relieves strain on the imported system. That's the reason why we provide these incentives. So the logic here is, why not be willing to provide the 3-year window that we're saying is okay on the front end to bring a project online, provide that window as an opportunity for an agency if they lose production from a project to be able to restore production. They make the investment to bring it back online, and they can still be under contract to receive incentives. And the scenario I'm describing actually played out for the city of Beverly Hills. The city of Beverly Hills had a groundwater cleanup and recovery program, and they ended up producing water. They brought the program online, they were producing water, and they were receiving incentives from Metropolitan. They ended up facing an issue that took their plant down, and they had to make investments in bringing that plant online. And under the provisions of the current LRP contract structure, their contract was terminated. So we are now bringing as a policy question to the board a recommendation that if we're willing to provide a 3-year window for folks that have a hard time bringing a project online by a slated date, can we also think similarly about a project that goes offline and an agency has to reinvest to bring it back up to speed and start producing again, where we could honor a window of up to 3 years where they're not able to produce, but if they can get it back online, we're willing to provide that extension. And so what we're presenting to the board on Monday at the Water Planning and Stewardship Committee is this concept as a framework. And also, if the board is comfortable with that framework, approving that relief for that Beverly Hills project. And I would share with you that we brought this as an information item and received positive comments from the board in the previous month. So that's why we're bringing the action now. And so I'd be happy to answer any questions or receive any comments if there are any on that particular item.
Are there any questions out there? Hearing none, go on, Devin.
Thank you, President Williams. So the next item that I had wanted to just really tee up is there are a number of developing issues on the Colorado River, and I don't see actually Bill Hazenkamp online, but I was hoping to be able to have him speak to some of those issues. Oh, there you are, Bill. As many of you know, Bill is our manager of Colorado River Resources, and he is point in negotiations that are happening on the river that relate to these issues. Bill, if you could just provide an update on some of what you're seeing develop there, that'd be great.
Thanks, Devin and President Williams. I'm happy to report it's snowing in parts of the Colorado Basin as we speak.
Hey.
Granted, not a lot, but anything you get in early October is a plus. And in fact, they're expecting more snow over the weekend, more significant snow over the weekend in parts of Utah and Colorado. So we'll take it. I'll just leave it at that. And it was a wet summer as well in much of Arizona and Colorado as well. So who knows? Maybe there's some good news on the horizon. Over the last month, we've had some changes after the board approved a settlement agreement with IID. The agreement was signed, ending a 2+ year lawsuit that IID had filed against Metropolitan. And I think this is a great news for us and for the river, that the two biggest agencies in California can now work cooperatively again together as we address some of the river's problems. Under the settlement agreement, there are 3 major components. One is that IID gets additional storage amounts in Lake Mead. IID's been aggressively over-conserving water more than they need for their transfers, so this would give them a place to store some more water in Lake Mead. They also would agree to make help make any drought contingency plan reduction contributions that would be required of California if Lake Mead drops down below 1045. So they would help in making those contributions. And finally, in recognition of the importance of saltancy issues in the Colorado Basin, Metropolitan agreed to support and look for opportunities to find federal funding or state funding or other support for getting more action at the saltancy without actually having to agree to contribute any money ourselves. We do agree to contribute support and effort and look for financing obligations, opportunities to help IID. So that's a good news story. And at the CRUA conference, I think we're going to try to get together and have some kind of event with the IID board members and Metropolitan board members that are at that conference in December. We're also moving forward with a new fallowing agreement with the Quechan Indian tribe, and in November we're scheduled to take the agreement to the board, Metropolitan's board, for approval. That would be a 2-year pilot program that would, similar to the BARD program, do a seasonal fallowing in the summer season, and the saved water would come to Metropolitan. If that program goes forward, we'll have a partnership with virtually every agricultural entity on the Colorado River in California. Also, we early in the year were planning on taking a fair amount of ICS out of Lake Mead to fill the Colorado River aqueduct. But what we've seen happen this year is agricultural demands on the river are down again. They were down last year quite a bit. We thought because of COVID. Now we're kind of coming out of COVID, but ag demands are still down. In fact, IID and Coachella's underrun this year is 110,000 acre feet that we weren't planning on getting at the beginning of the year, but that extra water is made available to us. To put that in perspective, the underrun from IID and Coachella is larger than our state project allocation in 2021. So it's quite, and it really speaks to the success of IID in conserving more water. They're already conserving 400,000 acre feet to transfer to San Diego, to Met and Coachella, and they're underrunning another 100,000 on top of that, which is benefiting us, but it's also benefiting the Colorado River, because it looks like now we're not going to have to take any of our ICS out of Lake Mead, and Lake Mead will be a little bit higher, or is a little bit higher, because we haven't had to take that ICS out. But now that we passed the new water year on October 1st, the releases from Lake Powell have been ratcheted down. 750,000 acre foot less will come out of Lake Powell this year than it did last year. And we're already, of course, at the lowest level ever in Lake Mead. So whether we get a lot of snow or a little snow, we know those releases for the next year are set. And Lake Mead is forecast to drop 17 more feet by the end of next year, regardless of how much snow we get. And so that's when the bathtub ring is already at a record 150 feet tall. That would be 3 stories taller than the building I'm in right now at downtown LA. Adding 17 feet more to that is certainly a cause for concern. So the lower basin states have been meeting to try to develop a plan to reduce that draw by perhaps half. Can we have, instead of Lake Mead ending at 1050 feet the end of next year, which is 17 feet lower than it is now, can we cut it in half and give us all a little bit more breathing room? So we've been in discussions. We are continuing to work with Arizona and Nevada. We will be working with the Bureau of Reclamation and including Mexico on a plan to roll out by the end of the year to see what we can do to bend the curve and to prevent the reservoir from going down as much as we have. We've already started that by doing our supplemental fallowing program with Palo Verde Irrigation District. We've increased the fallowing call by 60,000 acre feet a year that we're paying for, along with Reclamation, Southern Nevada, CAP. That water will stay in Lake Mead and reduce that draw. Arizona said they have extra supplies that they could do on top of their shortage, and we're in discussions with other agencies on the river to see what we can do to reduce that decline, which helps us, because at 1045 is when Metropolitan will have to start making contributions under the drought contingency plan. So that if we can slow the decline, that firms up our supplies in Lake Mead as well. So that's where we're at the moment. The overall long-term negotiations have not started yet. I think part of the reason is we still don't have a confirmed commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. It sounds like that's getting delayed another month before we might get her confirmed. So I'm guessing that until she's confirmed, we won't start the overall negotiations. Nonetheless, the states are still meeting together to analyze the size of the problem, to understand what the impacts of the various actions might be on our overall water supply. But the long-term negotiations have not started. Probably later this fall is my anticipation. So that concludes my update. Thanks.
Are there any questions out there for Bill? Another fine job, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so I guess it's back to you, Devin.
Thank you, President Williams. One other item did kind of float up on my radar screen that you might be interested in and be aware of is we had a discussion with our engineering and operations committee last month, and that discussion was around our regional recycled water program. It was a quarterly update, but we also shared with the committee some concepts that we might want to investigate that could help speed up the delivery of that program and get it online a little bit sooner. And one of those concepts was the notion that right now Metropolitan is limited to a design, bid, build approach for all of our engineering projects. And we floated the idea that we might want to look at an alternative delivery path. It could be design build, it could be construction manager, general contractor frameworks. We would still need to work out what the best approach would be. But we got positive feedback on that. And so next week on the agenda for our Communications and Legislation Committee is an item that would allow our general manager to work with an author, to find an author and work with an author to develop legislation that would authorize Metropolitan to do that. And so that's a pretty significant item that is focused on giving Metropolitan a little bit different path forward in getting that project done than we do our normal CIP projects. And I did want to share that with you as an item that was added to the agenda for next week.
Questions? Okay, I don't see any. Go ahead, Devin.
That's all I had for today, President Williams. So happy to take any other questions that folks might have on other items.
Yes, please bring up your questions. Get them answered right now from the right people.
Yeah, I have a question, Harold. It's Pierce One.
Well,
I don't see a place to raise my hand.
Well, we're not in Zoom, but go ahead. You did the right thing.
Yeah, Devin, based on what I understand on the updated work on the forward-looking 25-year, plan, the shortage that we are going to experience out into the future and currently is going to be in the State Water Project, exclusion zone. And I'm wondering if we should expedite that MWD, work on, shoring up the reliability in that area. Because the more water we can provide there long term, it will free up water during non-drought years for everyone else. So there's no harm, no foul to anyone by, making that investment. And one would think that that would be a priority now. And I don't know how that showed up in the strategic planning deal, but the IRP really highlights that that's a problem. Unless I'm misunderstanding something, Devin.
No, Pierre, thank you for making that comment. The first thing is you're absolutely right. The scenario planning exercise that we've gone through in the IRP really highlights that as a need. And it's not just that planning exercise. I think it's also supported by the hydrology that we're seeing on the ground and the supplies that we're seeing on the ground right now from the State Water Project. So the first thing in response that I would say is I believe that your comment was represented in feedback that we received both at the board retreat last week, where folks were actually commenting about needing to shore up the reliability of the State Water Project dependent areas. But it was also reflected in comments made by our own member agency managers when we talked about this as an issue last Friday. So I agree with you. The staff here agrees that that is a priority. It will be part of the strategic plan that we'll be bringing back to the board. But even in advance of that, we are bringing a discussion item to our engineering and operations committee on Monday to talk about a handful of projects that could be brought to bear to improve that situation. Some of these projects are as simple as improving some of the interconnections that we have within our system that would allow Colorado River water and store Diamond Valley Lake water to get further into our system than it currently can. So we're very focused on this.
The IRP, the way I understand it, shows that virtually everyone else is okay based on the current projections of local and MWD supply.
If you look at the 4 scenarios that played out, what we're showing is that in 3 of those 4 scenarios, the only issues that we see are in the state exclusive areas. In the 4th scenario, conditions, if you see a really high growth scenario in the future and you also see significant erosion in some of our local supplies and the import supplies, you could see impacts that are more broadly felt. But generally, what you've just said is true, Pierre.
Okay, thank you.
Devin, this is Russ Lefebvre again. So if we're looking for alternate delivery paths, do we have to make a decision on a specific method for implementing that? Or are we going to try to make the legislation such that it's broad enough to pretty much allow us to do whatever makes sense?
So Director Lefebvre, right now, the request is that the board give us the authority to start conversations with an author, and then we would go through that process of identifying whether we want broader or more narrow authority, where the narrow authority might pick specifically, say, design build, or a little bit broader would say we have 2 or 3 options, and as the project develops, we would pick from one of those options going forward. What I would mention to you is DWR did this. They went through this process with legislation just this last cycle, this last legislative cycle. And what they sought was, I think it was 2 different options. They didn't narrow it down to one. They sought CMGC, construction manager, general contractor, and I think it was also a progressive design build approach that they sought. So we haven't made that decision yet. Right now, we're simply wanting to see if the board is comfortable with us starting this process.
Will we see that next week?
Yes.
Thanks.
Okay, any more questions out there? Well, folks, we're running out of time here. The last item on our agenda is adjournment. So I don't know if you want to do that, but if I don't hear any more questions out there, we're going to move forward to the next item.
Hey, given that opportunity, Harold, I'll ask when we take this additional water that's being made available by Imperial or other people, are we obligated to pay that back in the future? And how are we planning on doing that, Devin? Or actually, this is probably outside your bailiwick, but how are we going to do that?
Yeah, Bill, why don't you go ahead?
And how much of this do we already have that we borrowed from the Colorado partners or from the state partners? So how deep is that hole?
So under the settlement agreement, IID can store up to 50,000 acre feet of water in a Lake Mead sub-account that is controlled and owned by Metropolitan. So it's, to the outside world, it's all Metropolitan water, but between IID and MWD, it's IID water that we do have to pay back at a certain time. The total we have to pay back to them is on the order of 250,000 acre feet. And if they fill up the storage account, it would be closer to 300,000 acre feet. In the meantime, we get to use that water and have full access to it until they need it back. So it's a joint use water, and then if we don't need it, we can keep it in Lake Mead to help benefit the system. So it's really a shared resource between IID and Met and Lake Mead, moving stored water around in the various places until we get to 2026, when we're going to start renegotiating the whole agreements and everything else. So once we get to that point, we will clear the books and figure out a path forward. But between now and 2026, we're going to be holding them some of their water, and if they need it back, we would take it back out of the 1.3 million acre foot of ICS we have stored. So the bottom line is no impact to our ability to fill our Colorado River aqueduct.
Does that answer your question, Pierre?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, Mr. General Manager, the next item is adjournment.
That's correct, President Williams.
If that is the case, we are now adjourned.